listening to proposition's arguments, I have to say that I suffer. I suffer deeply in my soul, and I suffer because the side has spent a lot of time proving things which we assumed would be a given. Yes, of course, nuclear weapons are dangerous. Of course, if you have nuclear technology, you might be able to develop nuclear weapons. Of course, mutually assured destruction doesn't hold in the Middle East. These are basic points acknowledged by anybody with a passing knowledge of the Middle East. Of course, this is the case. And also, it's not even like it's just that they have the potential to develop nuclear weapons. They've already developed nuclear weapons. Israel has more nuclear weapons than China on most estimates. Iran has already developed nuclear weapons. And what we have to deal with, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that this is already the case. We are already facing a situation which is very dangerous and becoming increasingly dangerous, and we have to come up with some kind of viable solution for the problem. As I quote my first speaker on the proposition side, we need to come up with a solution that makes sense. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, that's where the entirety of the proposition argument comes crashing down around our ears. Because their solution is probably the least feasible, most ridiculous possible solution to this problem that I have ever conceived of, and I certainly didn't imagine that this would be the proposition that they would be giving to us. Now, first of all, the UN resolution, it's completely untenable. It's illogical, unsustainable, irrational, and impractical. And let me explain to you, ladies and gentlemen, why. First of all, because we have to ask ourselves, what UN resolution are we putting across? If it's General Assembly, it has no binding power whatsoever. If it's Security Council, there's no way it's ever going to pass. Let's face reality. The US would definitely veto anything that banned nuclear weapons in Israel. Russia and China have extensive interests in the region. They would never allow this veto to come to pass. And furthermore, even if this veto did pass, all of the techniques that suggested are failed former techniques. They spent a lot of time explaining to us why the NPT doesn't work. I don't see anything in here which is more viable than the NPT. Let's see. Sanctions. Well, number one, no countries would ever agree to oppose sanctions because of the security interests that we've talked about with France, Russia, and China. Just a second. Secondly, freezing assets. Are you aware that they froze the assets of Hezbollah a couple of days into the Israel-Lebanon conflict, and it had no effect whatsoever, and actually Hezbollah's communist teams have come out on top on that conflict. Furthermore, I've already said this. Yes, it would never happen, but it bears repeating. This would never happen. And it's not just because the West would never impose these sanctions. It's also because these countries would never even accept them. You think that Israel will accept a security guarantee from England and Britain when they abandoned them in the 1948 Israeli war? Do you think that these Middle Eastern countries will bow and submit to leaving their nuclear technology behind? You think that they don't have something to do? You know what the difference between this situation and North Korea is? North Korea has no leverage whatsoever besides the nuclear weapons. What the Middle East has? I wonder, is it possibly called oil? Is it called OPEC? Is it called the fact that they can retaliate by raising oil prices, which the West are dependent on, and they can do something about this if they don't like the idea? Okay, so this resolution is completely unsupportable. However, just the general idea of a strict ban on nuclear technology in the Middle East is also inviable. Why? Because A, as we've said, the countries in the region would never accept this. It would make further enemies, not just of people who are already our enemies, like Iran and Syria, but also of countries like Israel, who would never be able to part with these weapons. We'd have to abandon a long alliance, long alliance with Israel, and make them our antagonists. We'd have to abandon long-standing alliances with Egypt, with Jordan, with Turkey. And furthermore, Iran would never give up the nuclear weapons because they know it's what's keeping them from being invaded. And so, ironically, it would necessitate a military invasion of Iran by the United States. Can we all see, ladies and gentlemen, how completely untenable the idea of a strict ban, whether UN resolution and poorly executed or not, would be? Yes?
Given that the West has already successfully agreed to impose sanctions on Iran, how does the argument hold up? And also Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons.
The argument holds up because I've already demonstrated that sanctions do not have enough of effect to impose on Iran for Iran to abandon.
But you argue that the West won't impose sanctions on the Middle East
region. Thank you very much. Furthermore, we have made the argument that they have completely ignored that nuclear technology, far from being the evil of the region, is actually hugely potentially beneficial because it is a possible way to break out of the vicious cycle of oil in the Middle East. Because oil is what causes most of the problems in the Middle East. It's what causes not oil and extremism, but the link between oil and autocratic regimes. Yes? And you said that there's a lot of wealth in the Middle East. Yes, there's a lot of wealth. There's also what you would call a huge wealth gap. There's a huge gap between the very rich and the very poor. And what that means is that the very poor are more likely to go in for extremism. And our not very complicated point was that the development of nuclear technology is environmentally feasible, it is economically beneficial, and it will cause employment, it will cause economic growth, and therefore it's actually a possible way out of this situation. I think my second speaker made the point that in Iran, a situation where you think that people who oppose the regime would want to ban nuclear technology, the people who are in this situation, university students, fiercely opposed to the idea of Iran's current regime, do not support the banning of nuclear technology. Conversely, they support the use of nuclear technology to improve the economic situation in Iran and thus further stabilize the country. Right. Furthermore, we have made the point that you have not sufficiently addressed that countries have rights to strategic energy resource development. They have the right to define their own futures, not to imperil their neighbors. But this is the point that we're going to get on. Because you said, oh, shall we just go in for diplomatic talking? Shall we just go for the carrot? Shall we, showing a complete lack of understanding of the situation, appease them like we did Hitler and thus start World War II? Well, let me tell you something. If we go in for a strict ban of the Middle East, we're not going to prevent World War II. We're going to start World War III. Right? And frankly, ladies and gentlemen, what we have to do is we do have to look at diplomacy because the international situation has changed. The UN, the NPT, UN resolutions don't really have the same impact they do before. And so we have to look at a multiplicity of roles, ladies and gentlemen, for different players in the situation to play. We need the cooperation of Russia. We need the cooperation of China. And yes, we do, on some levels, need the United Nations. And this is not an unsolvable problem. You said we shouldn't engage in dialogue with Iran for some reason. But actually, Iran has been engaged in the last couple of years in strenuous attempts to talk to an American administration which refuses to talk to them. The foreign minister of the Ayatollah Iran, whose name is, I believe, let me just reference this, whose name is Larijani, has repeatedly indicated in suggestions that he would like to open a dialogue with the United States. The head of the International Atomic Energy Association, Mohammed Al-Bandi, wants to talk to Iran, but thinks it's not possible under the current political climate. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot go in for a violent ban upon the Middle East. We cannot just blanketly try and limit what's going on in the entire country. It has no possible feasible point. All right, and let me just address a couple of minor points because I think that what you've been saying about nuclear energy actually kind of reflects the level of knowledge you've had about this entire field in general. Now, first of all, actually, nuclear technology isn't going to run out in 50 years. That's an assessment that was made in the 1980s. Now the assessment is anything between 500 and 100, even without the introduction of nuclear fission. Furthermore, nuclear costs are dropping. It's only about 30% more expensive than natural fuel costs, and it is the most viable alternative source of energy. Furthermore, you said that non-state actors are dependent on states, and therefore by using these sanctions, we would be able to cut off non-state actors. That's dependent on the sanctions actually working, which they will not. Therefore, they will have no effect whatsoever on non-state actors. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I think I've shown you thoroughly is that A, a UN resolution trying to ban nuclear weapons is completely impractical. That B, a strict ban on nuclear weapons in general is completely impractical. That C, it overlooks the potential benefits that nuclear energy has in the region. That D, states have a sovereign right to try and improve their own strategic energy resources. And E, that we need to return to old-style diplomacy, if only because the last couple of years has shown the complete failure of a refusal to talk to our enemies and our allies. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I don't see on any occasion how this motion could possibly stand. Thank you very much.